Hey now, it is Dan Aberhart here, and welcome to the Growing the Future podcast, where we talk to folks who like to innovate, collaborate, and transform the agricultural industry. Thanks so much for joining us for Season 5, Episode 9. And listen, when we talk about innovation and collaboration and transformation at the beginning of this podcast, I don't want those just to be buzzwords. I want them to have teeth, and I felt that the episode today is a great example of an individual, who has innovated in the area of collaboration. Collaboration is how we work with others. And frankly, this is the key today to success in agriculture. And there aren't many folks doing what my guest is doing, if any, are doing it the way he's doing. And it really is transformative in the way that it could be the difference between you spending next Christmas with your loved ones or not from the farm. If you like that sort of thing.
I'm in the business of making family Christmas great, right?
Make family Christmas great again. There you go.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Red hat.
Yeah, that's literally what I do. I have a little scorecard actually, and how many families are getting together for Christmas this year because of what I did. Man. It's a little scorecard I keep every year.
Good for you,
so
man.
That's
everyone should have a scorecard, and that's a great scorecard. So, you talked about it in your presentation to a bunch of farmers online. Our stubbornness in this business of agriculture, it's both our greatest strength, but it's also our greatest challenge. It can be a destroyer as much as it's something that makes things grow. So that's why today we have somebody on the show called, from a company called Stubborn Farm. I thought that was pretty catchy. Encapsulates a lot of it. But hey, before I introduce today's esteemed guest, I just want to remind you to check out the Aberhart family companies online, starting with aberhartfarms.com, where we grow food to feed the world in Langeberg, Saskatchewan, suregrowth.ca, where we offer precision agronomy consulting services, convergencegrowth.com, where we accelerate solutions across food, health, and agriculture, and aberhartaggsolutions.ca, where we deliver one-of-a-kind fertility solutions of the future to your farm. And get notified about our new episodes by signing up for our newsletter at growingthefuturepodcast.ca. My next guest's mission is to help stubborn farmers work better together. He just showed me his business plan is inside his wallet. This man is brilliant. Originally a seventh-generation farm boy from Bob Caygeon, Ontario. I think there's a Tragically Hip song about that. He married a Midwestern farm girl and now lives near Mount Vernon, Iowa. Since 2010, he's written 6 books. I wish I'd read them all and enacted them in my life, but we'll get the Cole's notes here today on his niche topic, stubborn farms. Save farms in 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces. Folks, you've heard he keeps a scorecard on that. He has pioneered a completely different approach to farm management and succession, which he gets farm families to stop being so stubborn with each other and start being stubborn on actual habits that make a farm and a farm family successful. This is a really big deal, and I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. And today we're going to talk about his background, how he became this mediating maverick. He wants to get rid of mediation altogether. We'll talk about that. But he sent me his book, Bulletproof Your Farm. He's been speaking, he's been coaching, he's been improving lives in the agricultural industry, and I can't wait to pick his brain. Welcome to the show, Andy Caygeon Junkin.
How are you today, sir?
I'm doing amazing, and I'm eager for the knowledge that will be coming forth with. You're classic, man. I'm excited about today's episode. So
I'm surprised we haven't had beer together. We're the same age. We're both Canadian.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody that's American thinks that Canadians are next door neighbors. This is Saskatchewan and Ontario are 1,000 miles away from each other, but we probably know a lot of the same people. So,
well, there's only like a degree and a half between everybody of separation from everybody in agriculture.
Now, Dan, I have to ask you: did you have kids? How old were you when you had kids?
I had children at 23.
Oh, you were smart. Yeah,
I smart?
Well.
I've been waiting like 24 years for validation on that. Thank you.
I started having them at 42, and So my kids I have 3 kids under 5, and maybe 1 on the way. So
Well, you said that you've got a foot and a half of insulation between you and the kids, so you can have these podcasts without getting interrupted. But let me ask you, that's interesting, because at 23, I think I was still a baby and I didn't know much. And you talk about patterns and repeating history and stuff like that. I mean, at least at 47 now, and I have a 7-year-old too. So to be fair, I've got kind of a foot in both arenas. as far as parenting goes. But I found that I'm a much more patient, self-aware person. And yet, for as much as I've got, as far as I've come, Andy, I still need to be reading more books like this. And you know what's fascinating? We might read a book about, how to maintain your snowmobile, or read a book on whatever your passion is. But reading a book on how to maintain your relationships, or be a good parent, or what it means to be a father or a husband, or whatever person in the community or leader, those are the things that really make a difference in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I try. So my first client, he called me up. So I started in Western Ontario. Basically, my dad, he plowed down my crops. We had the first year I came home from college, because my uncle made an offhand comment that my crops looked better than my dad's. And so
that's fighting words.
And basically, and so we had a succession planner come out to the farm, and that succession planner was there for 20 minutes. And then my dad left angry, and my mom said, "Do not buy any more farming equipment until you've got a business plan with your son." And what the backstory to that is, when I was at Guelph, I was the only kid to have his own office in the university library, because the day I left for college, my mother, she showed me the farm financials, and she said to me, "If you don't fix these numbers, I'm leaving your father." So I punched in 12 hours every day at the university library, and then I never missed a pub night at University of Guelph. I was known for two-stepping, because you put a farm boy in a university library for 12 hours. He's going, and a college campus that's 74% women ratio, he's going to go nuts. So I got burnt. I got both ends. But the thing is that so my mom, she said to my dad, "Do not buy any more farming equipment." And so my dad went off into an auction sale just to spite her, and bought a manure spreader, and came home with that manure spreader, and the shit hit the fan. And so basically for 10 years after that, I was trying to save my parents' marriage, instead of getting married myself. And so you were smart enough at 23 to know enough to go get married. I was delaying that, because I felt that, to me, being a farmer was the center of my identity. And how could I possibly get married if I didn't have a farm? Our farm goes back to 1832. The first white man killed in the township was my ancestor, and he died on the back end of our farm clearing it. And I thought it was so that I could have a right to farm. And I found out the hard way, nobody has a right to farm. It's a privilege. And basically, since I've been turning around shitty situations ever since the day my parents got divorced over a manure spreader. And it started off by helping my friends in Western Ontario. And since 2010, I've been doing this full time.
Isn't that fascinating, though? Like the first thing in your we talk about boundaries. For your mother to put that on you as a student, essentially, not just the fate of the family farm surviving.
7 generations. 7 generations.
And you're just trying to meet some girls, the two-step in there, and whatever 25-cent, pub night. And here you are. Yeah, not only do you have to save the family farm, Andy, but you have to save your mom's marriage.
Yeah. No boundaries. I mean, every cowboy has the sad stories, right? And so at one time I felt sorry for myself, right? And I actually got to the point that I almost hung myself in the barn.
Yeah.
Like I said to my parents, if we don't get this sorted out by my birthday, and this was 6 months ahead, I said, we got to get this sorted out. We got to get a succession plan. We got to get a business plan, or else I'm going to hang myself. And so I sat on the edge of the barn beam, and I walked in that barn just feeling sorry for myself, right? And feeling that my destiny had been misguided by my father's decisions. He was a bit narcissistic. And then I couldn't get out of my head. Basically, when you tell a friend in confidence that your parents get divorced over a manure spreader, I mean, that word gets out like wildfire. And so for the 10-year period that I was struggling with, like, what the heck am I going to do with my life? My friends started coming to me for a beer when they had problems with their old man as well. And I don't know what happened, but in that moment that I was about to hang myself, I could not get my friends, their faces out of my minds and their struggles out of my minds. And I haven't been back to Bob Caygeon since. I walked out of that barn And my life mission went from continuing a 7-generation family tradition to trying to help as many farms as possible across North America in my lifetime. And I won't go back to Bob Caygeon until my boy spread my ashes. And I've been able to help 20 farms in 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces. And, we've developed a different approach to how we do things. So that's basically me in a nutshell.
That's your big why. That's powerful.
Yeah,
that's huge. Yeah. So we've come a long way. I mean, we talked about how we're both 47 years old, and I mean, things were different when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s. But what has been the biggest change that you see in agriculture?
I would say that the thing that they never taught us at university, I think the biggest change we've had is modern health sciences. I mean, for today, I'm not going to talk about the impact Viagra has on succession planning. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But the thing is that back in the 80s or back in the 60s, when Dad was 60, he would retire because his hips were shot. Nowadays, when Dad hit 60 and he's got bad hips, he goes in for hip surgery. He's farming to his 80s or 90s. And if you want to farm to the day you die, I'm all about that happening. But suddenly we got, instead of one generation really farming at a time and getting a little bit of help from both generations, you got 3 generations farming together. And you got a situation like it doesn't make sense every 25 years to be splitting up the capital between siblings, because you got to keep it all together in order for the technology to be able to give you that cutting edge. So you got 3-4 generations, 3-4 siblings farming together. And you got a situation in most shops where it's there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians, right? Everybody's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And you get nothing but headaches as a result. And we haven't really thought through like how much money is slipping between the cracks because we can't make decisions together, because we're butting heads. And more importantly, the days that we're actually getting along good and you see a problem in your partner's area of responsibility, but you don't want to say anything because you don't want to rock the boat. And we tend to be passive aggressive and talk about things after the fact. And the decision to not make a decision or address a problem and fix it is a decision in itself. And I would say that on most farms, miscommunication and egos is affecting the farm's bottom line more than the markets and weather altogether. It's a huge problem that we have never addressed. And it's causing a skyrocketing mental health crisis, and it's causing a skyrocketing amount of farms to have real farm debt issues. They may look great from the road, but their balance sheet's a mess because of bad decisions for 20 years.
Well, you talk about sitting on the edge of like a barn rafter with a rope around your neck.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the cost? What is the cost of that? And what's the cost of divorce? I mean, and men, men are more susceptible to this statistically than women, are they not?
According to the statistics I look at, they are. But I think the root issue we have in agriculture, the number one issue we have, is entitlement. Like, nobody gets married expecting to get a divorce.
Yeah.
Nobody goes home to farm with their family expecting there's ever going to be problems.
Yeah.
We just expect it's going to be happily ever after. And that is the most foolish thing ever. Like, the couples that get married think that there's never going to be any problems. That's never going to happen to us. That's a sense of entitlement. And, we know that there's a 50% divorce rate in marriages. But you think about guys that you went to college with or university with, and you're 47, I'm 47. Half the guys I started off school with that were hell-bent to go home and farm are not farming now. And that's because we had 20 years of butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. And it either caused a farm dead situation or a family to fall apart. And that's because we go into this fairy tale of it's going to be happily ever after, and it isn't. We got to be realistic and get really good at problem solving. So whatever problems we have as a family, which we will encounter, whether they're external or internal, we can handle those problems. And that's how you're in the 12. We don't know how many marriages are actually happy, but I would say it's about 12%, yeah. Right? The truth is we know how many people get divorced. We don't really know how many people are actually happy in their marriages. Same thing with family farms. I think there's only about 12% of farms that are actually happy. And you actually look at the statistics, only 12% of farms are able to pass over grandma's farm to grandchildren, right? And I thought I was entitled to it when I was going home to farm. But the truth is the probability of you actually being successful and being able to farm successfully with your family is extremely low, and it's getting lower every day. So instead of having this attitude of entitlement, I think we have to have the attitude of an underdog and do everything we can to proactively evolve how we work together as a family, so we won't have we can solve whatever problems are thrown at us.
But let's be real. Most folks that are working with you are coming to you in crisis. Do you get anyone that comes to you at the beginning?
My life goal, Dan, you're correct. Okay, you are correct. Okay, but I mean, my life goal is I teach at Dordt University. I teach at a couple of universities. I develop programs. This past year, I wrote 4 books that come together in a package. I have a 1-day workshop where I'm trying to get farm families to adapt a proactive way. I basically give away the guts of my program, 10 simple ideas to improve. I'm not meaning this as a sales pitch, but just try to give away ideas to how to improve how you work together so that you can avoid these problems, because I'm tired of meeting these families 10 years after they've had 10 years of frustrations working with her. I'm really all about trying to evangelize and get rid of the need for a mediator altogether by getting farm families to just adapt common sense but counterintuitive ideas to evolve how they work together so that they can get off on the right foot. But yes, unfortunately, too many people are contacting me after they've had frustrations, and too many people are calling me after the auctioneer's already been called. And I have a history of pulling rabbits out of hats and turning around the most dire situation. I've done it in 22 states and 5 Canadian provinces. Most of the time, there's been 2 or 3 mediators already out to the farm. And we've been able to turn those situations around. But, I mean, the way we're doing succession planning, the way we're doing a farming with family, it's got to change. It's just got to evolve. We've got to transition from a parent-child to professional working relationship off the bat, right? We have these prenuptial classes in order to get married. We should have the same philosophy when it comes to starting a partnership with your family.
Well, we want to touch on some of the ideas that you bring forth in your presentations, in your coaching, and your books. But just to stay with your story for a second, one of the things that really fascinated me personally, having a challenge with public speaking, is you were talking as you're public speaking. Well, this is the hardest thing for me to do, and I'm not a natural. And you talked about how before you started a podcast and you're a host, but that wasn't it. You're a better guest. What have you had to push through to live in your purpose and your big why? That was a bit of a challenge to run this business that you're running.
Well, I would say public speaking has always been one of my weaknesses that I'm working on turning into strength. But I would say that the biggest challenge for me was the first 7 years that I started doing what I was doing, and I was helping a lot of friends and I did a lot of work for free. And did a lot of, basically I was helping a lot of friends in Western Ontario, and I got my first 10,000 hours in by not really charging for it, and doing a lot of work for friends and a lot of favors. It was really hard to cash flow. I mean, when you start a business and you tell people that you want to start a business helping stubborn farmers work better together,
stubborn when it comes to getting the money out of the pocket.
A lot of people think you're crazy,
Yeah.
right? But it was a matter of pushing through and believing in yourself and believing in your cause and making it work. And obviously, it was the first 5 years, it was like riding bulls, where you're dealing with situations where you're like, what the hell just happened? And but you're getting back on that horse. And over the years, we've been able to learn from experiences and I just live to do this. And we've been able to develop a different approach to how we do things.
Well, you've been mediating for 15 years. That's quite an accomplishment. Yeah. You haven't starved. Yeah. I take it you had the odd steak now, just not craft dinner. Hopefully you're out of that stage.
Well, I hope to do it for your 7-year-old. So when your 7-year-old's 27, I'll probably be still doing this. So
that's a great goal.
Some people, it's a job what they do, and for me, it's a life cause.
Good for you, man.
So yeah.
Well, you were talking about being a mediator, but your goal is to get rid of the mediators. That you leave the farm in such a condition they don't need that anymore?
What a part of it's education and being proactive. But I think the game-changing day for me was a couple days before I was sitting down with the family. There was a family, and I was sitting there, and grandma was at the end of the kitchen table, and she was just crying her eyes out. And there's 2 brothers, and they were in their late 30s, and they were best friends at each other's weddings. And one brother had picked up his sister-in-law's best friend at the wedding. So you had two in-laws that were best friends 20 years before. And that day, they were worst enemies. And just a couple days before, I had met with a family counselor, and I was frustrated that, what I was doing as a mediator up to that point was, I'd get somebody to say, okay, I'm going to make these changes, and then if you make these changes, then I'll make that change. So everything was conditional instead of unconditional changes yourself. And what I realized from the psychologist that had his PhD, that I was kind of getting some mentorship at the time from, that was also an accomplished mediator in the farm succession space on a North American level that was just retiring. He says, half the people that go see a marriage counselor, they get divorced within 4 years. And he says that's the same thing for me. He found out my statistics, and I was getting 80% success rate. And he says, man, if I get 20% resolutions, I'm happy. And at that point, I was getting the results because I knew what it was like to not to get together with your family at Christmas. And so I wasn't taking no for an answer. I was very determined. Like, people would be confrontational, but I wouldn't take no until we got results. But I still, for a family not to get together for Christmas is detrimental to me. I was taking it really personally. And I knew that family, they didn't have me out there to that farm to actually resolve a conflict or to improve the relationship. They had me out there to get a divorce. And I looked out the window, and there's a 16-year-old kid, and he was leading his 4-H calf. And he was, and that calf was being stubborn. And Dan, you got kids in 4-H?
No, I don't, unfortunately.
What's 4-H all about? You know what 4-H is?
I think it's about leadership.
I think it's that, and I also think it's about self-improvement, becoming a better person. The farm being a challenge, the challenges of the farm challenging you to become a better person. And the farm was bringing out the best in this kid. That kid actually got up at 4 o'clock every morning to milk cows before he got on the school bus. And he just loved to farm. And his mom's biggest complaint was that he didn't change clothes before he went out to the barn. And that was a kid that couldn't wait to farm. And yet his parents and his aunt and uncle were at each other's throats. That kid his dad was talking about buying out his uncle at a god-awful rate of that they could afford to do it that year. But when milk prices hit a low, there'd be no way they could cash flow that. And that kid, 10 years from now, wouldn't have a job at Walmart, right? He would not be farming. And I thought, how ironic is it that the farm is bringing out the best in that kid, and yet it's bringing out the worst in the adults in this room. And the calf was being stubborn, and I thought, well, his mom is saying things to his aunt that could not be taken back. And I thought, how ironic is it that she's being stubborn, right? She was pointing blame. That the fact was, with the 3 people, the 4 people in that room were good people. They had a really good farm. They were really good people. One guy was a hockey coach. One guy was a church leader, type person that anybody would have a beer with, but not 10, right? Really well respected, upstanding, really successful farm too. But they had all made mistakes related to production. They had all made mistakes in how they worked together. They had all made mistakes that they slept in, and some days were not the best version of themselves, right?
Yep.
And the problem was that they were all not wanting to own up to their mistakes. They were wanting to just point out blame in each other. They were being stubborn with each other. And what I realized, there was a Bible sitting there at the end of the kitchen table, right beside me. They had a big Bible, and the words were written in red. This is a family that read the Bible 3 times a day, but they were being anything but Christian with each other. And I don't care if you're a Christian or a Buddhist or atheist, or even believe Elvis is alive. These words just jumped out at me. It was Matthew 7:5. It said, Matthew 7:5 says, do not take the speck of dust out of your brother's eye until you take the plank out of your own. And for me, that was the moment that everything changed. Because I realized we got to stop being stubborn with each other And we got to start being stubborn at the habits that make a farm and a farm family successful. And it's not us trying to control the other people, which we can't control. It's a matter of us becoming more disciplined and being stubborn at adapting, turning our bad habits into good habits so the farm and the farm family can be successful. And that was the moment my whole business changed.
Oh, man. Well, that resonates because, this happens in my own life on a whole bunch of levels. We keep this scoreboard, right, in our heads about what we've done. And, well, I've done this, though. So this person should do that. And it should be reciprocal. And I know I've been giving a lot more. And I've actually been a really virtuous person in this relationship. And let's get Andy here. Okay, I'm going to get you in front of Andy because Andy's going to say, Dan has been a pretty good guy. He's done a lot of things right.
Exactly.
And you really need to listen to Dan and sort of, but then you get there and Andy, you're gonna challenge me just as much. And the problem is I'm either going to be able to listen and hear it and understand, or I'm going to spend all my time defending myself. What do you think I'm going to do when we meet, Andy? I'm going to be defending myself. And then I'm going to be horrified when you're going to say, well, Dan, have you been listening? Have you been paying attention? Do you understand how this person feels? Are you ready to make some changes in it? Well, who's this Andy guy? I'm paying him to be on my side.
That exactly. A lot of people, they have me out there to take their side and to tell their brother how to be different or their sister be different.
How's it go when you tell them, well, there might be a little bit of the problem here yourself?
Well, and the thing is that what I've realized is that, if you can get a farm family to agree that, okay, when I start working with a family, I get them to identify 3 things that they're having problems working with in each other. Like, what are 3 problems? I mean, you might have 20 problems, but let's just pick on 3. Like, one might be that we tend to talk over top of each other instead of listen to each other. So we might adapt the rule, nobody's smarter than the other guy, we make all decisions together, right? And then we might adapt another rule, we have an issue with accountability. So we might have a rule that say what you do and then do what you say. And then we might adopt a third rule. Let's say let's always be the partner and friend anybody we want to work with. And if we adapt those 3 rules and we write those out every morning as we put our boots on to go out and work, and we think through, okay, these are the 3 changes I'm going to make in how I work with my partners today. And then when you come back and you're sitting on that bench where you have your boots, if you give yourself a score A to F, there's going to be some days that you were not accountable. You might have said you're going to do something, but then you didn't follow through with it. Well, I want you to spend a minute thinking through, okay, tomorrow, what am I going to do different to make sure that changes? And if you have all of your partners make 3 simple changes like that over 90 days, and have that moment of self-reflection where you see yourself in the mirror and you realize, hey, this is not a 6-pack around my waist. It's a keg, right? And I've got to do some sit-ups here to tweak this, right? That's the mindset we've got to get.
Man.
And that's a first step towards doing succession. I mean, who wants to take on, I've been in succession deals where I brokered a deal and there's a real hesitation. Okay, I love my son and I love my daughter. She has a lot of potential, but man, there are some hesitations. And so I do that with 3 things as far as how we work together. And 3 things, I get each partner to identify 3 of their own personal faults. Like one of my faults, I think for every challenge you have in life, you either have an incorrect belief, a character flaw, or a skill deficiency. So an example of an incorrect belief might be showing up to the barn late. You might milk cows. You're supposed to be there at 6 o'clock. Well, sometimes you don't show up till 6:20. Well, if you have a situation where there's a son coming home to the farm, dad's going to have a hard time doing succession planning if the son continuously shows up late to work and is early to leave, right? So that might be one point that every 90 days, or, you decide whether you want to do this every 90 days or just make one change a month, right? And as far as each person's character, but basically change 3 things every quarter in each person's character and how you work together as a family. If you can do that over the course of a year, That's 24 changes. That's 12 changes to how your family works together as a team and 12 changes to the character of each individual. And I guarantee you in a year's time, it would be a better place to work. And all that frustration and button heads would be gone. And your farm would be making so much more money because you're little things like somebody being passive aggressive about not talking about problems until it's after too late. That's what causes a farm money.
Yeah.
Little things like not being accountable, little things about, not making best decisions together and making decisions based on egos and pride, being more insistent on being correct in an argument than the correct decision being made. That's what causes farming partnerships to fail. And so what I'm passionate about is getting the family to everybody voluntarily evolves and sees farming as a challenge to become a better person. And then doing estate planning a couple of years later is easy.
Well, I love your example of how you do that. And we were talking about doing this in our business where we not only identified our core values, but we are working on objectives that would be action items under each core value. So it's not just something that we say we do. Like, for example, we do what we say could be a core value.
Yeah.
Well, what are the action items? How are you going to physically, what are 3 or 4 things you're going to do that show that you're going to do that? And that probably reinforces, okay, that person's making an effort. But one of the things I think we mistake, and you touched on it earlier, was we go into these things looking for other people to change when that's actually not what's going to affect change. It's actually only us, but that's the most incredible lever people don't even get a grasp on. Man, when you change things inside of yourself, and sometimes it can just be how you look at a situation. It is just your perception. How you perceive that situation is 100% reality, Andy. And what if we changed our thought about that situation, changed that person, changed our net outcomes in life in a long enough timeline? You're in a totally different zip code having Christmas with, all your soon-to-be ancestors. God bless you.
Yeah.
Your life is full.
Yeah.
And you're going around the table talking about gratitude before the turkey and stuffing.
I remember having in my head, there was a day that I did not do that. Mm-hmm. And I chose to be stubborn. And as a result, I ended up milking somebody else's cows 500 miles away from home. and really because I felt entitled and I felt my dad had to change, I didn't need to change. Right. And I think the thing is that we have a decision to make. What kind of stubborn we're going to be, because either stubborn is going to make or break your farm. Either you're going to be stubborn on being disciplined and self-improving, and farming's going to make you a better person, or you're going to be stubborn with everybody else and it's going to make you the biggest jerk in the world. And it's going to result in your demise as well as the demise of your entire family. And that's what's got to change.
Yes, it's one of the greatest arenas of challenge that ever existed to mankind. And you talk about the stats too, where in terms of mental health, we're right next to veterans as far as,
Oh yeah.
all that. And the number one reason people don't show up at work today globally is mental health. So this is important to our bottom line. So you showed me this wallet. I'm very curious about this wallet that you showed me. It has a business plan inside. And so obviously every time you open up your wallet to spend some money, you're reviewing your business plan?
Well, my personal wallet, it's pretty simple. I just the first thing I only have 4 rules for how I run. Like one of my business rules for my business is I got to return 300% return on investment. So every dollar the farmer spends on my services, it's got to be 300% back. And that's a core. It's on my website. It's a business rule in my wallet. And then I have goals. Like for myself, the first goal I have here is read 75 pages before I get out of breakfast. Have breakfast every day.
75.
And so there's a couple simple things that really make my business successful. And I think that for every farm family, I think most business plans are business lies, right? You might write a business plan, but there's 2 different problems with it. One is sitting in a filing cabinet. So 3 weeks after you wrote it, you're going to forget what's said on it. Yeah. And you're going to forget what's really important to the business and to yourself. And then second of all, the bigger issue is that there was I went home, I went to college. The first week I was at school, because the way my mother said what she said, I went and sought the professor that taught business planning courses. And I started my business plan the second week of university. The first week was pretty drunk. But anyways, the second week of university.
Then he sobered up. And wrote a business plan to save the farm and save your mom's marriage.
Well, basically I spent 1,000 hours putting that together, right? But the thing is that I went and did that. My dad didn't participate. And then I came home and my dad wasn't involved in the business planning process. And the issue that my dad and I had was I was pushing when young lads go off to college, they got 1,001 ideas as to how to improve the operation. I went to school. The first year I came home, my dad shut down my dreams, basically. But my friends, like the guys across the hall from me, they actually copied off of each other for building a hog barn in 1996. And their dads went and financed two $700,000 barns that were just matching each other. But at some point in time, for both those guys, they came and they said, like, we are having problems with dad shutting down our ideas. What's going on? And what I realized the hard way is that when young lads come home from college, at some point in time, these suggestions for change are perceived by the old man as a criticism of what's been done in the past.
Right.
And here mom and dad have spent their entire lives building up the farm to give the kids on a silver platter. And yet sometime for these kids to suggest that, that mom and dad, these different ideas are perceived by mom and dad as criticism of past management decisions. And it's like taking that silver platter and trampling on it. It's like taking a gift horse and looking at the horse's teeth and mouth, right? It's being very disrespectful. And at some point in time, mom and dad are going to double down on bad decisions because they get really defensive and they feel really vulnerable and they feel, soon pride causes really successful farms to fail. Because at some point in time, when mom and dad are going to shut down sons and daughters' ideas for improving the operation, and then vice versa, son and daughter are going to be shutting down grandpa's ideas because he shut down theirs, and it becomes more important to be right in an argument, and as a result, things ain't right. And what the one important thing I believe in is that you as a family, it comes down to having a monthly meeting where it's not just granddaughter given. I had a situation where a granddaughter, she was successful in turning around the production in the dairy herd to the point that they had to build get a new bulk tank. And it was all her work that really improved the profitability of that operation to the point that they had some tax issues at the end of the year. They needed to invest money to avoid capital gains tax. So what they did was she went and wrote a bit, got some research, and she wanted to put a new calf barn ventilation. And so she presented that idea to her grandpa, and her grandpa was standing there in the milk house and closed his arms and shut down her ideas. He says, yeah, we'll look into that. Well, he didn't look into it and instead went and bought a combine without talking to her. And they didn't need a combine. They only farmed 400 acres.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I said, Darlene, don't blame the sinner, blame the sin. And the sin was that you weren't involved in decisions. And so what we started doing in that situation was we got her and her two brothers and her grandpa and her dad sitting down once a month. And grandpa had to come to the table and dad had to come to the table with an idea to improve the farm efficiency the same as Darlene did. And her two brothers did at the same time. And what that attitude went from being Darlene criticizing what's happened in the past to the family brainstorming ways to improve the efficiency of the farm and the efficiency of how they work together. And as a result, they went from being stubborn with each other to being stubborn and actually listening to each other. See, I think what's really important through that process, yes, you make each meeting I keep them for the first 6 months. I like to keep the ideas to less than $1,000 because what I'm really concerned about is getting everybody to come to the table with an idea that improves farm profit by $3,000 without spending $1,000. And so if you have 3 partners, maybe 2 out of 3 ideas are good. So you're going to make at least $5,000, which justifies that hour. If you can sit down for an hour as a family and improves farm efficiency by $5,000, a lot of times it's $50,000. and little efficiencies that we find on the farm, that's great. I mean, that's a huge benefit. That's why I guarantee a 300% return on investment for my time. But the bigger thing is what we're getting everybody to do is actually listen to each other. Instead of looking at things one way, we're looking at things 5 different ways, right? We're looking at the different options of how we do things, and we're getting families being able to make problem solve. We're problem solving how we problem solve. And so, 77% of farms do not have a succession plan. And that's because when family farms sit down to do succession planning, that's the first time they ever sat down as a family to have a professional business meeting at a kitchen table. And as one guy said to me, he said, I used to sit in the same chair and get hit in the back of the head with a wooden spoon if I talked out of place. How am I supposed to speak up at a succession planning meeting with the same man sitting at the table? Well, I want to fix the way the family problem solves on small little issues. It's like kindling. You start with, like when I was a Boy Scout, my boys actually just went to Scouts today. They the first time they ever went to Scouts, they just have for toddlers here locally. But the thing is that when I was a toddler, they told us to go build a fire. I went and got a big ass log and it was wet, and me and my cousin tried to light a fire but then our Boy Scout leader taught us that you start with the kindling first.
Right.
And then you add larger and larger logs as the fire can handle it. Well, it's the same thing with decision making. We got to start with small decisions first, and then we add larger and more complex decisions later on. So the other thing that on top of getting everybody to self-improve, what I want to do is get everybody stubborn at actually listening to each other, sitting down, making decisions together as a family once a month. And as a side effect, you make more profitability, but more importantly, you're learning to listen to each other. So if you can have 24 meetings where you're doing that, then you can sit down and you can do a 10-year strategic plan as to where the farm is going to be. And part of that is to do estate planning.
Oh, man. That sounds so good.
And so that's when I work with a family, I basically work with a family for 2 years, monthly meetings, make one improvement to production, one improvement to how you work together. And over 24 months, the farm's more efficient. Everybody's working well together. And then we can talk. I mean, until you can squeeze out an extra 10% profit out of the farm's bottom line together as a family by listening to each other's ideas, you're not ready to talk about where the farm's going to be in 10 years.
I like this idea of kindling because I think you might have a really high quick start and a really low quick start working together. Often, maybe that family dynamic between parent and child, whichever one is which. But one person might say, okay, we're making some progress now with Andy, and we got to get over here. So we're ready to expand the farm, or we're ready to do this thing. But the other person's like, no, I'm going to need like 100 days of small things just to build my trust incrementally from us to make any progress.
Absolutely.
Then the high quick start's like, well, hey, I thought we were making progress. You don't want to be my partner? Like, you don't want to. That's got to be interesting to work with.
Well, I really think that before we pour cement, like I work with a lot of dairy farms because, I'm just a dairy boy, right? But the thing is, I milked a few cows in my life. So the thing is, I work, before you pour cement, like there's a lot of farms, especially in Ontario and the Midwest here, that have been in the family for over 100 years. And and a lot of these farms have been paid for, right? It's old money. But what I see with a lot of families, the year that the kid comes home, they pour cement for a new barn. And I really think that there should be a 3-year window where we first of all learn, can we actually work together? Right? And more importantly, let's take decision making from good to great. Because my hesitation is that, any fool can go build a new barn. The question is, can we actually pay the bills? And the thing is, if we take our return on investment from 3% to 10% by being more efficient, if you think about this, anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making, anything you can do to improve the quality of decision making, that is going to skyrocket farm profitability and family relationships. And I want to get those fundamentals in place first. And then when we pour cement, there's no hesitation that can we afford this. And more importantly, for that 2-year window, that 2 or 3 year window, I want to see that we can work together. The thing is, there's lots of kids that go off to be lawyers, that after 3 years of being a lawyer, they realize they want to be a gay hairstylist or something different, right? And it's one thing to disappoint your parents in that situation, right, but it's a whole different element if you have a situation where your parents have poured $1 million into a new barn or barn expansion and locked a family farm that's been in the family for generations into debt, and then you're suddenly stuck living somebody else's dream. Yeah. I want to make sure for 3 years that the son and daughter really enjoy farming. You know, it's one thing to do it in high school as a kid. It's another thing to actually do it as a career. Same as being a lawyer. I mean, it's one thing to be an intern at a lawyer's office. It's another thing to actually do it. I want to make sure of that. But more importantly, I want to make sure that, you know, I want to see a 2-year window where every month the son and daughter are making one improvement to their character. So as I said earlier, we're taking a guy with potential or a girl with potential from good to great. And then there's no hesitation. Can this kid do it, right? There's no hesitation by the sister in California. Can my sibling do this or not, right? But more importantly, I want to do it a 360-degree review. After the first year of the son and daughter making improvements to their character, they've made 12 improvements to their character. They showed to their parents and their grandparents that they're willing to self-improve. I want to turn the tables for 2 years after, and I want everybody in the family to make self-improvement. So your 71-year-old grandpa, if you make a suggestion to him, Grandpa, don't be critical, provide constructive feedback. I want to see that he's able to do that, right, and is willing to self-improve before you pour cement and you stick yourself into a business partnership with that guy for 30 years. Because it is not worth it. I had a guy I had to take off out of a suicidal situation 2 days ago where he was getting an opportunity to take over a multi-million-dollar business, but that exact situation, his grandpa was being cynical and constantly negative to the point that he was almost hanging himself. And it's just not worth it. So the root issue was that Grandpa felt entitled to treat his grandson however he felt because he was given this opportunity. Well, and I think that we got to stop being entitled by both. I mean, and vice versa. There's some successors that come home to the farm, they show up late to the barn, they don't put the full effort in, they feel entitled too. So I want to make sure everybody on that farm, all generations, don't take each other for granted. And we have an attitude of continuous improvement and trying to be the best partners we can be with each other. And I want to see that work. And then we can do strategic planning as far as barn expansion or business expansion or diversifying. And then we can also do succession planning. And succession planning after that is a 3-hour conversation instead of a 10-year family feud. Because 77% of farms do not have a succession plan because you get a bunch of stubborn people around the kitchen table and everybody's walking in that meeting with expectations and they're upset that other partners don't have expectations. If you have an attitude of bullying when it comes to decision making, you're never going to have a succession plan. And that's why 77% of farms don't.
And you'll never be out of business, Andy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your business is only going to grow. I think that's so fascinating. If you could tell us a little bit more about how making incremental changes to yourself signals to the other people around you that you're willing to change. And even if you're just trying, you must be able to bring situations back from the brink. But conversely, what do you do if I'm a listener? And I love what you're saying, Andy, but I just can't get that other person to change. They won't. They'll never, Andy. What do you do then?
Well, I think you have to have an honest conversation as to how serious are you about being a partner? You know, I think that, why I like to do a performance review every fiscal quarter or every month as to how we're doing as far as our self-improvement is we can objectively, I see a lot of families that they bicker with each other and they provide cynical comments to each other. And they think that that's providing critical feedback. Well, that's just, you may not be picking up what the other person's putting down. By you having a family business meeting where there's a structured process for you to objectively say, okay, this is written on paper, we got to stop being, something simple like, we got to stop constantly being critical and we got to provide solutions. Well, we want to review that every month. How are we doing with that? And if you have a partner that consistently doesn't do that, or if you have a partner that you give feedback to, hey, you got to show up to the barn, be the first one there, last one to leave, right? And if you want to be a partner, earn a partnership role in this farm. Well, to write that down on a piece of paper and then consistently for 3 months, you don't get that feedback, then we have to have a conversation. Okay, we might be family, but that does not make us good business partners. And then there's an opportunity for you to have an exit strategy that's clean, and for your family to go a different route with still getting together for Christmas 10 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I find fascinating is that a lot of folks might be really attracted to listen to this podcast initially thinking, oh, here's a fellow that can help me fix the stubborn people in my life. But hopefully by the end of this, are you starting to get it? Because I'm getting it, that I need to change, that I need to listen, that I need to demonstrate that I'm coachable, that I'm improving, that I care enough about this partnership. I'm going to bring the best part of me before I worry about that other person's shit, get my own shit together.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, we're always going to go 5 steps forward, 1 step back. And there's got to be an understanding that your partner's never going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes continuously. But as long as they're making an effort. See, what I liken it to is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay, so what I find that's funny is that the guy that's most likely to kick my ass is the first guy to cry. Because he'll go on for 20 minutes about how his brothers or dad is a jerk and go on and give real examples that are, the neighbors would be surprised by. But then I started to say, okay, what is it like to farm with that guy on a good day? And that will cause that man to cry. Because on the good days, there's nothing like it. And the thing is that everybody's got a good side to them, being the Dr. Jekyll, and everybody's got a monster to them as far as Mr. Hyde. And nobody gets married to a jerk, and nobody goes home to farm with their family expecting there's going to be problems, right? They go home to farm with their family because they like farming, they love their family. And there's nothing like it when you guys are working together as a team. There's nothing like that feeling. But unfortunately, those days when everybody's the best version of themselves just becomes fewer and fewer to the point that I get called out there. And I think the challenge is instead of trying to change 20 things about your partner, is if you as a partner try to identify 3 things, what does my Mr. Hyde look like? What are my 3 biggest pet peeves my partner have with my performance that I can improve? And if you can constantly ask yourself every day, write those things out when you go out to put your work boots on, and at the end of the day, ask yourself, did I actually follow through with this? Like, do I have a tendency to procrastinate? Well, did I procrastinate today? And one of the action items might be identifying one thing each day that you don't want to do that you got to do in order to be successful. And ask yourself at the end of the day, did I get that done? And that, if you do that for 90 days, you'll make that habit stick. For me to suggest to any 25 years ago, if I told you all this stuff, I would have said this is a bunch of, I wouldn't even listen this far into the podcast. I would have said to be a successful farming, it's all about crop inputs, soil fertility, those hard assets, but it really is the soft issues that become hard problems in farming. And, Warren Buffett, he makes a point. He's a busier person than you and I, but he makes a point for 3 minutes to write out his goals and then evaluate himself at the end of the day as to how he's doing on those goals. That's called journaling. And I thought that was only something for schoolgirls. But I've seen a lot of grown men that are really smart farmers do really stupid things because they act like schoolgirls when they're working with their partners, because they are rational people, but they suddenly become extremely emotional. And I think the thing is, when I was a child, my grandpa, he was a Clydesdale man, and he had a big old Clydesdale in his pasture field, and named Joe. And I could jump on the back of Joe, and Joe, as long as we were in the pasture field, and he wouldn't buck me off because he was pretty old, but he wouldn't go and do what I told him to do until I got a bridle on him. And it's only when I put a bridle on him that he went where I want him to go. And I think it's only when we ask ourselves, when we're putting our boots on in the morning, that's like putting a bridle onto your emotions. Like 98% of the decisions we make are actually emotional. And excuse me for cussing, but it's our emotions it's these things that cause us to poop the bed, right? It's when our emotions get the best of us. That takes very rational, level-headed guys. That's what causes farms to fail, is when we let our emotions get the best of us. And in the situation of the Clydesdale was the emotions, and the little 100-pound soaking wet farm boy was the rational behavior on the back of that horse. And who's in control of where you're going is depending on whether you got your emotions bridled or not. Is it your rational behavior, or is it your emotions taking over? Right? Because that horse weighed 2,000 pounds. I, as a farm boy, only weighed 100 pounds, if that. And I think I think you got to ask yourself as a family, are we going to have a culture where our emotions guide this ship? Are we going to have a culture where we set our goals and we're acting rationally, and we're constantly improving ourselves, and we're showing up when we show up to work, we're the best version of ourselves. We're always trying to have our A game. We're always going to make mistakes, but every day and every hour, we're trying to be the best version of ourselves. And if 2 hours ago I lost my temper, the question is not what happened 2 hours ago and spilt milk. The question is 2 hours from now, how are we working together as a team? Because that can really dictate as to how successful you are for the next 48 hours, and really whether or not your family name will still be on your farm's mailbox in 48 years.
You must have seen some incredible success stories, and that must be incredibly fulfilling for you, my friend.
It's pretty cool when you see a family that when you leave a farm and you look at the farm's mailbox and you know that family's name will be there for another 50 years because of what you did that day. It's a pretty cool feeling, and that's what I live to do.
Well, I'm proud of you, man. That's incredible. And you're an inspiration. And this is what modern masculinity to me should look like. It wasn't our father's definition, but they had a different set of survival circumstances. Our survival circumstances are different. It's more cerebral, it's more emotional, it's more collaborative. We have to get along with the people around us. And how much is that? If you talk about wanting to jump off the barn with a rope around your neck, talk about 2 days ago, a guy wanted to take his life because of what somebody else is saying. Yes, mental health is a sickness, but how intertwined is our mental health with those around us? And how can it improve if we've got the right support and a loving situation that's improving and getting better, and you have hope for the future?
I think the thing is that these hippies in California, they say that the family farm is dead. There has never been a generation where the term family farm is more relevant. Because yes, we may not be no longer sole proprietors. We may have our assets into a corporation, but the vast, vast majority of family farms, the majority ownership in the shares in those corporations are owned by family. And if you want to pass over grandma's farm to your grandchildren, you got to take the principles of what grandma taught you when you were playing with your cousins in a sandbox and put it in reality behind the barn. And, just because we have shares in corporations instead of owning it all these days, we have to actually learn how to share. And there has never been a generation where the term family farm is more relevant. And every generation has its challenges. Like when my ancestors came over from Ireland in 1832 to clear the land in Bob Cajun, I guarantee you that 10 years after that fact, they were different people. They were hardened, tough men. I guarantee you that for every generation on my farm, they had different challenges, whether it was drought, whether it was the Depression, whether it was going from horses to tractors, whether it was the 80s farm crisis. Every generation had its own challenges. But the challenge of our generation, I truly believe, is turning working with family from a weakness to a strength. And it's either I'm excited about the future of farms. I feel that there's only going to be about 10% of farms. Every generation, we lose half of our farmers. And I think that we're going to lose another half. I mean, you and I are 47. We've already seen half of our friends get out of farming, even though they had the passion when they were 20, because of the dynamics behind the barn and how they pretended to be perfect, but things weren't perfect. And they made a bunch of excuses to exit. But we got to stop making excuses. We got to start being stubborn with each other instead of each other. We got to start being stubborn with the habits and how we work together as a family, and turning ourselves from our weaknesses to our strengths by knowing ourselves. We got to make stubborn a good thing in agriculture instead of a thing that causes us to fail.
I love it. And the thing that excites me too, I think about it, there was hardly a hired man on the farm when I grew up. I can't really think of any memorable hired men, because my dad did it all. That was the culture. But now there's a whole team of people on the farm. The farm's 10 times as big as it was when I was growing up, right? So where did all the other folks that were farming that, 15,000 acres go? They didn't make it. They're not, or they're farming less or whatever. So it's a sort of a war of attrition, right? But we have to extend this not only to our employees now, this sort of technology that you're talking about, but we have to be strong enough and capable enough and be able to lead enough that we can take that from our family to our employees, to our community, to this industry, because the industry is going to be fighting for its survival on different levels too. Right? Yeah. Because of regulation and politics and geopolitics and whatever. So there's a resilience there that can spread outwards, I think.
If you give me, everybody says that farming is a game of economies of scale. And it is. I mean, you've got a 13,000 acre how many acres? Well, we don't need
17,000.
The neighbors are gossiping about that, but it doesn't matter. But the thing is overall is that you take two farms, one's worth $40 million and one's worth $5 million. And let's say that there's three partners in that farm today. Okay. Now let's just say that the $40 million farm, and both farms, the neighbors would look up to them. There's a lot of respect by the neighbors. All the neighbors would say that's a good Christian farm family, run a tight ship. But the truth is, behind the barn, they're butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, and there's money slipping between the cracks. Now, let's say the $40 million farm, they hear this podcast. And by the way, share this podcast if you know of a neighbor that could hear this. But the thing is, let's say that they listen to this podcast and they don't change. And they just keep on doing what they're doing. They constantly butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions. But the $5 million farm, they realize that we got to turn working with family from weakness to strength. And they go from butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions to getting on the same page and evolving how they make decisions together and getting everybody pulling the same direction. Now, I got three questions for you. The first question is that if in the next 7 out of 10 years, the farming economy is in the dumps, and there's years where the cost of production is higher than what you're getting paid, which family is going to be able to make the decisions to evolve and get through the crisis? The family that's $40 million got a little bit of an edge of competitive economies of scale, but every decision that's butting heads and pulling the farm in different directions, or the family is on smaller, but they're able to be on the same page and everybody's pulling the same direction. The second question is that which farm is going to have a succession plan in 10 years? The family that can't sit down and make any production-related decisions, what's the probability of them being able to talk about what that farm's going to be in 10 years' time? Or the family is a problem solve how they problem solve, and so they're able to sit down in the afternoon and have a conversation, and it makes logical sense, right? And they're able to make decisions not based on emotions, not being stubborn with each other, but being able to be rational and be able to solve complex problems by actually listening to each other. And the third question is which family do you want to work on for the next 10 years? And that's all I got to say.
Andy, if someone's listening, and I'm sure there's somebody listening that needs your help, and maybe they've found out that it's not just that you can help them with a stubborn farmer in their life. Maybe they've figured out, like me, I am the stubborn farmer. I'm a stubborn farmer.
Well, I think the thing is that the reason why I do a workshop is every farmer can, like what I do for this workshop is I just basically charge what I charge in an hour for you get a day with me. And basically you go home with 10 simple ideas to evolve how you work together. And what I do is have farmers from all across North America make sure no neighbors are in the same meeting, so that it's like Alcoholics Anonymous for stubborn farmers. So basically, every farmer can take these ideas and actually apply them cost effectively, and then we provide. I've got you basically go home with four. This is one of the books. There's 4 of these books, and you can actually implement this program with your family on your own, and you don't need me. Right, I'm all about trying to save as many family farms as possible. So if you can instead of calling me after you're in a dire crisis, why not be proactive and say, hey, how can we evolve? How can we transition from a parent-child to professional working relationship? How can we evolve from good to great? And I think it's just that's what I'm all about. I mean, I don't make pretty much any money off this program, but I'm all about improving the odds of your family still farming together in 50 years' time.
Love it.
So
I love it, man. How do people get a hold of you?
Just go to stubborn.farm and I'll send you a free copy of my book, Bulletproof Your Farm. And you can read it and see if that's of interest to you and your family.
You know what?
Yeah.
You have a fantastic gift, and there's nothing better often than watching people with their God-given gift living in it absolutely 110%. And just, I mean, you know what? I know some people that maybe aren't living that purpose, and it's tough on them. And I see what you're doing, man. It's absolutely incredible. And the difference that you're making, all the things that you're doing at your career, your business, these are the things we know people think about, at the end. So you're fortunate for that, my friend. You're very fortunate. So thanks so much for coming on the show. It was you that reached out. It was incredible to have you on. I think this is going to be a very special episode. And I as well hope that, like you, I mean, some of what we're doing here can make a difference for folks in a way that impacts their lives. And that farm sign remains the same at the end of the day into more the next generation. We'll imagine the next generation when our kids are 47, the problems they'll have, right? They'll maybe need a new set of tools. Of course, maybe artificial intelligence will be running everything by then, but in the meantime.
I think there's some things like decision making that artificial intelligence theoretically should be able to do a better job than humans, but I think humans will still be involved. So, yeah.
We're getting to a dangerous topic now. Robots are.
Yeah, we are. So,
yeah.
Anyways.
Bulletproof your farm, folks. Don't fool around. Yeah. Get it bulletproof. Call Andy. Look up Andy on stubborn.farm. Thanks so much, Andy, for coming on.
You take care.
Love it.